Queen Zalara stood on the balcony of her magnificent palace, gazing out over the vast expanse of her empire. The city sprawled beneath her, a gleaming metropolis of towering structures, bustling markets, and elegant spaceships soaring through the sky. Zalara was the ruler of this empire, a queen whose name was feared and respected across the galaxy. Her species, the Varnari, were known for their intelligence, strength, and their relentless pursuit of power. They were a race that had conquered countless worlds, bending them to their will, and Zalara had led them all. Her every decision shaped the future of countless civilizations, and her word was law. Yet as she stood on the balcony looking at the stars above, she felt a certain emptiness within herself. She had everything a ruler could want: wealth, power, and respect. But she had never known what it meant to be loved for who she truly was, not for her power or position. Love for her had always been something distant, something for those who were not in her position. She had never allowed herself to feel it, but today something was different. The royal guards were preparing for a special mission, one that would see her interacting with a human delegation from a distant planet. Humans, though small in numbers, were scattered across various corners of the galaxy, struggling to carve out a place for themselves among the superior species. They were considered primitive and unworthy by most of the galaxy's inhabitants, their societies simple and their technology far behind the Varnari. Despite this, they had a certain resilience, a spirit that intrigued Zalara. And now she would meet one of them up close and personal. Her thoughts were interrupted as a voice called from behind her. It was Commander Ivrak, her loyal second-in-command. "Your Majesty, the human guard is ready for your protection," Ivrak said, bowing low. Zalara turned and nodded, her sharp gaze never leaving the view. "I will meet him shortly," she replied, her voice steady. "Have him prepared. I want him at his best." Ivrak hesitated for a moment, sensing the queen's unusual mood. But he said nothing, merely bowing again and leaving the room. Zalara took one last look at the city before turning away and heading towards the waiting guards. She had long grown accustomed to the rigid formality of her life, but today something felt different. When she arrived in the hall, she saw him standing there, Ethan Cole, a human guard assigned to protect her during this diplomatic mission. At first glance, Ethan appeared to be just like any other guard. Tall, strong, and dressed in the simple uniform of the Royal Guard, he seemed ordinary. But there was something in his eyes, something that caught Zalara's attention immediately. Ethan stood still, his posture perfect, his eyes focused ahead. But there was a quietness about him, a calmness that seemed out of place among the usual bravado of the guards. His eyes flickered slightly when Zalara entered, but he made no move to acknowledge her, his expression neutral. "Guard," Zalara said, her voice echoing through the hall. Ethan's eyes turned to meet hers. "Your Majesty," he replied, his voice soft yet steady. Zalara studied him for a moment. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance. He was human, with short, dark hair and a face that seemed young, yet weathered by life. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, the calmness, the quiet strength that radiated from him. He wasn't like the other guards who admired her from afar or feared her presence. "No," Ethan seemed different. "I have been informed that you are one of the finest in the Royal Guard," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Tell me, guard, why did you choose this path?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to the floor before meeting her gaze again. "It wasn't a choice," he said simply. "I was assigned to it, but I serve because it is my duty. My job is to protect you, Your Majesty." Zalara raised an eyebrow. There was no boasting in his words, no sign of pride. He spoke like a man who had accepted his role without question, without expectation. It was something Zalara was not used to. Most of her subjects would have relished the chance to be in her presence, to boast of their accomplishments, or to beg for her favor. But Ethan seemed different. "You are a man of few words," Zalara observed, her curiosity growing. Most would speak endlessly to gain favor with their queen. You are quiet. Ethan's eyes softened slightly. I speak when there is something worth saying, Your Majesty. There is no need for empty words. The queen was taken aback by his directness. Most of her subjects, even the bravest of them, were usually careful with their words around her, aware of the power she held. But Ethan's words carried a certain honesty, an authenticity that was rare in her court. It made her wonder what kind of man he truly was. I have never met a human like you, she said softly, more to herself than to him. Ethan didn't respond. He simply nodded and stood at attention, waiting for her next command. Zalara turned and began walking toward the door, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. Come, guard. We have a long journey ahead of us, she said, her voice firm but with an unexpected warmth. As they walked together, Zalara found her thoughts drifting back to Ethan. There was something about him that intrigued her, something that made her feel unsettled. She had never allowed herself to become emotionally attached to anyone, especially not someone from a lesser race. But there was something about Ethan's quiet presence that made her question everything she had ever believed about power, about strength, and about connection. As they exited the palace, the air outside was warm, the city bustling with activity. Zalara could hear the distant hum of ships lifting off and landing, the noise of vendors calling out to passers-by, and the quiet murmur of citizens going about their daily lives. It was a world that Zalara had created, a world that she ruled with an iron fist. Yet, as she stood on the steps of the palace, she felt a strange sense of emptiness. She glanced at Ethan, who was walking a few paces behind her. He was still silent, his eyes focused ahead. There was nothing remarkable about him, nothing that would make him stand out among the crowds of the royal guard. And yet he felt different. His quiet strength, his humility, his lack of desire for power, these were traits that Zalara had never encountered before. It made her uneasy. How could someone so seemingly ordinary have such an impact on her? The journey to the human delegation's ship was uneventful, but Zalara couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within her. She had always been in control of her emotions, always the queen, always the powerful ruler. But with Ethan by her side, something was stirring inside her, something she couldn't quite understand. As the ship took off, leaving the royal palace behind, Zalara found herself glancing at Ethan once more. He was still silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon, but there was a calmness about him that she couldn't ignore. It was as if he had nothing to prove to anyone, not even to her. And that was what made him so different from everyone else. In the days that followed, Zalara found herself seeking out Ethan's company more and more. She had no need for his protection. There were plenty of guards to ensure her safety. But she found herself drawn to his quiet presence, his calm demeanor, and the way he seemed unaffected by her status or her power. He treated her like an ordinary person, not a queen to be revered. And that was something Zalara had never experienced before. Their conversations were few but meaningful. They spoke about the galaxy, about the nature of leadership, about the struggles of their people. Zalara found herself opening up to him in a way she had never done with anyone else. She spoke about the loneliness of being a queen, about the weight of her responsibilities, and about the price of power. Ethan, in turn, spoke about his life on Earth, about the simple joys of family and community, about the quiet moments that made life worth living. Zalara found herself fascinated by his perspective, by his ability to find meaning in the smallest of things. It was a view of life that was so different from her own, yet it resonated with her in a way she couldn't explain. As the days passed, Zalara began to realize that she had been wrong about many things. She had always believed that power and strength were the most important things in life, that ruling the galaxy was the ultimate goal. But now, with Ethan by her side, she started to see that perhaps there was more to life than just conquest and domination. And in that moment, Zalara realized something that shook her to her core. She was beginning to feel something she had never allowed herself to feel before, something that terrified her. She was starting to care for Ethan. As days turned into weeks, the bond between Queen Zalara and Ethan Cole deepened, but neither of them fully understood the gravity of what was happening. They continued to travel together, visiting various planets as part of Zalara's diplomatic duties, but every moment spent with Ethan made Zalara question everything she had once believed. Zalara had always prided herself on her ability to maintain control. Her emotions, her decisions, everything was deliberate and calculated. As the queen of the Varnari, she had never allowed herself the luxury of falling in love. Love, she had always believed, was a weakness. Power was what mattered, and love was a distraction. But now, as she spent more time with Ethan, she felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crack. Ethan, on the other hand, continued to remain calm and collected. He was a man of few words, and his quiet nature only seemed to make him more intriguing to Zalara. He was not like the other men she had encountered. He did not fawn over her or try to impress her with empty words. He treated her like a person, not a queen, and that made her feel something she had never felt before, something real. One evening, after a long day of negotiations with a neighboring empire, Zalara and Ethan found themselves alone in her quarters. The rest of the crew was busy preparing for the next leg of their journey, leaving the two of them in a rare moment of solitude. Zalara sat at her desk, reviewing reports from the day's meetings, while Ethan stood by the window gazing out at the stars. Zalara couldn't help but watch him. He stood so still, his posture perfect, his eyes focused on the vastness of space. There was something serene about him, something that made her feel at ease, even in the midst of her responsibilities. "I've been meaning to ask you, Ethan," Zalara said, her voice soft but steady. "What made you decide to become a guard? Was it your sense of duty?" Ethan turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "I suppose it was," he replied, his voice calm and measured. "But it wasn't just about duty. It was about protecting those who can't protect themselves. I've always believed that the strong have a responsibility to look out for the weak." Zalara raised an eyebrow. It was a simple answer, but there was a depth to it that surprised her. Most of the people she interacted with spoke of power in terms of dominance and control. But Ethan's view of strength was different. To him, strength was about service, about protecting others. "Your view of strength is different from mine," Zalara said, her voice thoughtful. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned back to the window, his gaze fixed on the stars once more. "I don't think strength is about domination. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. That's what I believe, at least." Zalara stared at him for a moment, trying to understand the complexity of his words. She had always seen strength as something to be wielded, something to maintain her authority and control. But Ethan's words made her question that notion. Could there be another kind of strength, one that wasn't about power but about compassion? As the silence stretched between them, Zalara found herself standing up, walking over to where Ethan stood by the window. She stood beside him, her gaze following his as they both looked out into the vastness of space. There was something oddly comforting about the stillness, the quiet that surrounded them. "You know," Zalara said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I never thought I'd meet someone like you." Ethan turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers once more. "Someone like me?" Zalara nodded, her eyes softening. "Someone who doesn't try to impress me or win my favor. Someone who just is." Ethan's expression remained unchanged, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. He didn't speak, but his silence spoke volumes. There was no arrogance in him, no pretensions. He simply existed in the world, content with who he was. And that, in itself, was a form of strength that Zalara had never encountered before. The two of them stood in silence for a long while, each lost in their thoughts, the hum of the ship's engines providing a soft backdrop to the stillness of the moment. Zalara felt a warmth spread through her chest, something unfamiliar and foreign. It was the same warmth she had felt when they first met, but now it was stronger, more undeniable. "I have been alone for so long," Zalara said suddenly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I have never allowed anyone to get close to me. I thought I didn't need anyone, but now I'm not so sure." Ethan's gaze softened and he took a small step closer to her. "You don't have to be alone," he said quietly. Zalara turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "But I am alone," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I have always been alone, and I have always believed that being alone was the price I had to pay for power." Ethan shook his head, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that surprised her. "You don't have to choose between power and love, Your Majesty. You can have both, but you have to be willing to open yourself up to it. You can't keep shutting people out." Zalara felt her heart race, a strange sensation sweeping over her. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable, never allowed anyone to see the cracks in her armor. But Ethan's words were like a key, unlocking something deep within her. She had always seen her role as queen as a barrier, something that kept her apart from the rest of the galaxy. But now, as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she wondered if it had always been a choice. The silence between them stretched for another moment, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, with a connection that neither of them had fully realized until now. "You make it sound so easy," Zalara said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "But I have spent my entire life building walls. I don't know how to take them down." Ethan smiled gently. "You don't have to do it all at once. It's about taking small steps. And you don't have to do it alone. I'm here." Zalara felt a wave of emotion flood over her, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to feel something other than control, other than duty. She wasn't sure what this feeling was, but it was real. And it scared her more than anything else in the galaxy. For a long time, they simply stood there, together in the silence, watching the stars outside. Zalara didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to find out. She didn't have to face it alone. Ethan was there, and that gave her a sense of peace she had never known before. In the days that followed, their bond continued to grow. Zalara found herself seeking out Ethan's company more and more. She didn't understand it, but there was something about him, something in his quiet strength, that made her feel grounded, even in the midst of the chaos that was her life. But as their relationship deepened, Zalara couldn't help but wonder what the galaxy would think. What would the Varnari nobility think if they knew that their queen, the proud and powerful ruler of the galaxy, was developing feelings for a mere human guard? The very idea seemed absurd, but Zalara couldn't deny the connection she felt. Ethan had become more than just a guard to her. He had become her anchor, her source of comfort in a world that was constantly shifting beneath her feet. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Zalara found herself standing at a crossroads. She had always believed that power and strength were the ultimate goals in life, that love and compassion were distractions. But now, with Ethan by her side, she was beginning to see that there might be more to life than domination and control. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was room for both. And that thought, more than anything else, made her wonder if she could truly have it all. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There were many challenges ahead, challenges she had never anticipated. And yet, for the first time in her life, Zalara was ready to face them. Because now she knew she didn't have to face them alone. The days that followed were filled with tension, not the kind that came from battle or war, but a quiet, unnerving pressure that Zalara couldn't ignore. For the first time in her life, the walls she had so carefully built around herself began to crumble. Her emotions, once tightly controlled, now seemed to flow freely, unpredictable and overwhelming. But what was perhaps most troubling was how little she could control them. Ethan had changed her. As the queen of the Varnari, Zalara had lived by one rule above all others: power must never be compromised. But in Ethan's presence, she found herself questioning everything she had ever believed. He had opened her eyes to a different kind of strength, one that wasn't defined by control and dominance, but by kindness, loyalty, and understanding. She had never considered those things to be powerful before, but now they felt like the very essence of what it meant to truly lead. But the galaxy was not ready for such changes. Zalara knew that. Her people, her advisors, and her military, all of them had spent years building an empire based on domination and order. They would not understand her shift in thinking, her newfound understanding of what true leadership could be. And they certainly would not accept her growing feelings for a human. She had always known the Varnari were proud and insular, but what she hadn't anticipated was how deeply ingrained their sense of superiority was. To many, the idea of a human, an inferior species, being anything more than a servant to the Varnari was unfathomable. If they knew about her feelings for Ethan, it would mean the end of her reign. Not only would her people view her as weak, but the other species in the galaxy, who had always bowed before the Varnari, would lose respect for her. It was a thought that weighed heavily on her mind as she stood in her private quarters, staring out at the stars. The cold, distant light of the planet seemed to mock her uncertainty, a reminder that she was not in control. For the first time, Zalara felt small, insignificant. The very thing that had once made her feel invincible, the certainty that she ruled over everything, now felt like a burden. She had spent the past few weeks trying to push her feelings for Ethan aside, focusing on her duties, on the empire that depended on her. But every time she saw him, every time they spoke, the connection between them only grew stronger, and it terrified her. Ethan was a simple man, a human, and yet he had done what no one else in her life had ever done. He had shown her that there was more to life than just ruling, more than just power. He had shown her that there was love, and it was something she had never allowed herself to believe in. It was late in the evening when Ethan found her, sitting alone in the dark, lost in her thoughts. He had grown accustomed to these moments of solitude, but there was something different about tonight. He could sense the tension in the air, a feeling of impending change. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice soft but steady, "you've been distant lately. Is everything all right?" Zalara turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about everything, about my people, about this empire, about us." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "What do you mean, us?" Zalara hesitated, unsure of how to explain the feelings that had grown inside her. She had never been one for open displays of emotion, but now she felt the need to say everything she had kept hidden for so long. "I never allowed myself to feel anything," she began. "I thought power was everything, that it was the only thing that mattered, but now I realize I was wrong." She stood up and walked towards him, her footsteps slow, deliberate. "You've changed me, Ethan. You've made me see that there's more to life than just ruling. You've shown me that there's love." Ethan's expression softened, his heart racing at the words he never expected to hear from the proud queen. "Zalara," he began, his voice full of emotion, "I never meant to change you. I just wanted to be there for you, to protect you." "You have," she replied, her voice trembling, "more than you'll ever know. But it's not just protection I need anymore. It's someone who sees me, who understands me, not as a queen, but as a person." There was a long silence between them, one filled with unspoken words, with feelings that neither of them had yet fully acknowledged. Zalara's heart was pounding in her chest, a mixture of fear and hope swirling inside her. She had spent her entire life hiding from emotions, from vulnerability. But now, standing before Ethan, she knew that she could no longer pretend that she was invulnerable. "I'm afraid," Zalara whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm afraid of what will happen if anyone finds out. I'm afraid of losing everything, the empire, the respect of my people, the power I've fought so hard to maintain." Ethan stepped forward, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to be afraid, Zalara. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You don't have to lose yourself just because you care for someone." Zalara's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her fears begin to lift. Ethan's words, his unwavering support, gave her a sense of clarity she hadn't known she needed. Perhaps it was true. Perhaps she didn't have to choose between love and power. Perhaps she could have both if she was willing to fight for it. "I've spent so long trying to be the perfect queen," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I've realized that being perfect is not what matters. What matters is being true to yourself. And right now, I want to be true to what I feel." Ethan smiled softly, his hand still holding hers. "Then let's be true to that, together." Zalara nodded, her heart swelling with emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was a simple declaration, but it was enough. For the first time in her life, she felt like she could be herself, like she could step away from the weight of her crown and be someone more than just a ruler. But as the days went on, the consequences of their relationship began to unfold in ways they hadn't anticipated. Whispers began to spread through the palace and beyond. The Varnari nobility, who had always held the queen in the highest regard, began to question her judgment. The idea of a human, someone considered inferior, being so close to the queen was unthinkable to them. And the rumors only grew louder as Zalara's feelings for Ethan became more evident. One day, Zalara was summoned to the council chambers, where the leaders of the Varnari military and political factions awaited her. They were an imposing group, each one fiercely loyal to the queen but equally committed to the preservation of the empire's strength and dominance. "Your Majesty," General Valen said, his voice low and stern, "we've heard troubling reports about your relationship with one of the human guards." Zalara felt her heart race, but she kept her expression calm. "What reports?" she asked, her voice steady. "The relationship you formed with this human is dangerous," Valen continued. "It undermines the very foundation of our empire. The Varnari have always been the rulers of the galaxy. We cannot allow an outsider to have such influence over you." Zalara's eyes narrowed, and she felt a fire rising within her. "This is my choice, General," she said, her voice firm. "Ethan has proven himself to be more than capable. He has shown me something no one else ever has, true loyalty and understanding." The room fell silent, the weight of Zalara's words hanging in the air. Valen's expression hardened. "If you continue down this path, Your Majesty, you risk alienating your people. You risk everything we've built." Zalara's heart tightened. She had always known that this moment would come, the moment when she would have to choose between her love for Ethan and her duty as queen. But now, with the pressure mounting, she felt something stir within her. She wasn't willing to let go of what she had found. She wasn't willing to lose Ethan, not after everything they had shared. "You speak of duty," Zalara said, her voice cold. "But what is duty if it means sacrificing who you are? What is strength if it means denying your heart?" General Valen did not respond, but Zalara could see the doubt in his eyes. The other council members were equally silent, their expressions unreadable. But Zalara knew one thing for certain. She would no longer hide behind her crown. She would no longer hide behind the walls of power that had isolated her for so long. "Perhaps," she said, her voice unwavering, "it is time for a new kind of strength. One that includes love, one that includes humanity. I will not be swayed. I will stand by Ethan." As the council erupted into murmurs, Zalara felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had made her choice, and no matter the cost, she would face it with the man she loved by her side. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy would learn that true strength wasn't just about power. It was about the courage to change, to love, and to stand together in the face of adversity.